I wanted to spend a few minutes today to talk about and demonstrate how I manage all of the various config files generated by my DAW. I use Harrison Mixbus and Ardour, and both of those DAWs generate a lot of config files every time you change any preferences or presets and things like that. And I got to the point where I wanted to manage those files in an intelligent way. And I chose to use a dotfiles manager to do that. So the goal of today's video is to show you some of the tools that I use, and they're very specific to my process. They might be different for you, and some of the commands I use within the terminal. The goal not being to promote the use of a certain piece of software necessarily, because you might not be on Linux, you might not be using Mixbus or Ardour, and you might not like to use the terminal. But by showing you these tools and some of the commands I use in the terminal, then you could at least say, wow, I see why this is valid, and maybe I can find something similar to work in my particular setup. So I chose to put all of my configuration, well, most of my config, into what's called a dotfiles manager, and I use a tool called Yatum, which is a long-standing command line tool, which is a dotfiles manager. It's short for yet another dotfiles manager. And this is an invaluable tool that, again, is a terminal command line tool that also acts as a wrapper for Git. If you're unfamiliar with Git, it's what's called a version control system. And people who write code use version control systems to manage their code, especially with teams. But I have written code for 20 years for applications and websites, and so I've used Git extensively. And when you use something like Git, when you begin using it, within a couple of years, you might say something like, wow, what did I do before version control? And you might also say, wow, this works really well on text files. What if I use this for all my config as well? And so a dotfiles manager is one way to do that. So this is, again, a wrapper for Git, which allows you to manage these things and share them and save them and revert and all these things. So I'll get into some of that. But first, I'm going to talk about the benefits of doing this. And this is why I started using Yatum for my DAW configs. So I see four major benefits to this. And number one is basically a cover your butt what if scenario where, let's say you bork your hard drive and you need to reinstall your operating system from scratch, or your house burns, whatever. You have an offsite backup because you've pushed all of these files within the Git repository to a remote server, like GitLab or GitHub, whatever. So they're all your config files, and I have 210 files saved in my repository, not just from my DAW, but every config file that I have that's important to me is saved in there. And so again, it's a good way to have one more backup of that. I'm meticulous with my backups anyway, so I already have multiple backups of all my config, but this is all my config in one place, so it's nice. Benefit number two, which is even more relevant for me day to day, is I have these DAWs installed on several computers. I've got a desktop in the office, I've got a couple laptops, and I want all my DAWs to work the same from computer to computer. So by sharing these config files, that helps me do that. So if I took an hour to find the setting that puts my playback head in the middle of my timeline rather than all over the place, I don't want to have to repeat the process of finding that configuration on another computer. When I save my config files and manage them within my Git repository, then they're consistent. I pull them down to all my computers constantly. So that is really nice. And I guess you could say you have to be careful doing that depending on what you add. You don't want to necessarily pull something down that could break another computer, but you get to learn what things are safe. But overall, it's fairly safe. Anything can be reverted if you accidentally pull something down that isn't right. But benefit number three, and I've never really done this, but you have the potential to share any of these configurations with anybody else. So with one Git command, you could share your keyboard shortcuts with somebody else, if for whatever reason you wanted to. I've never done that, but it's available. Benefit number four is that you now have an audit trail for every single config file you add to this repository. If you're familiar with Git and version control in general, you know what that means, but if I add a configuration file to this repository, every time I make a change to it, I can see the changes I've made. I can decide, do I want to commit that and push it to the remote? And do I want that to, stay? And if I do make a change and I say, wait a minute, why did I do that? I can go back to my logs and find out exactly why I made that change and when, or I could revert to a previous version if I accidentally made a change. So an audit trail is kind of a big deal for a lot of people. So it might be inconsequential depending on your workflow and everything, but I find it very handy. So I think what's left to do now is give you some examples. As I said, I use Yatum, and I'm going to go over to my terminal. I have Mixbus running only to show you what happens and when I make changes. So one of the things you have to determine is, okay, I know these config files exist. Where are they? With Mixbus and Ardor, they're within, on Linux, they're within your .config folder. You can find them pretty easily in your, your file manager. You go to your home folder, .config, and then you've got these folders for all the versions of Ardor. And if you had more than one version of Mixbus, that'd be in here too. But almost all of your Mixbus preferences are in here somewhere. And that's a lot of files. You don't want to add all of these. Some of these change quite often. So, and some of them are more kind of transitory. You don't necessarily, like you toggle something on and off. You don't need to save that. But others are more workflow related or UI related, and those to me are very important. But how do you know which ones to actually commit to the repository and track? And I think there are 3 ways to do that. Number 1 is you can read the manual. I think Mixbus publishes an FAQ detailing each config file or kind of set of files and what is saved in there and how often it's saved. So I don't read manuals very often, so I actually have never read that. It's there though, and that's probably would be a good place to start. I tend to just watch files and see which ones change when I make configuration changes, and that's another way to do it. If you wanted to, you could actually open any of these config files with a text editor, but if you open one and change something accidentally, you could possibly disable your DAW. I would imagine, make it hard to start. But hey, there's one of those CYA things where if you did accidentally change one of these, you could, because you have that in a Git repository, you could just revert and say, let's undo that change. But as I said, the way I find these things is just watch which ones change. And you can actually do that in your Finder or text file, file manager. But I tend to use the terminal lots. So if you do an ls of the config directory for Mixbus, you can see all those same folders and files that we just saw here in a text listing. But in Linux has a very cool command called watch, and if you wrap that file listing within a watch command and you run that, then here's your same listing, but every time any of this text changes, you'll see it highlight and you'll see what changes. So that means since we're tracking very specific modification or very precise modification dates, anytime we change something in one of these files, we will see that highlighted. So let's say in Mixbus, I want to know where my keyboard shortcuts are saved. If I didn't already know that, I'm going to make a change to this shortcut. It's currently Shift-Alt-E. I will change that to Shift-Alt-R and watch the left side over here as I do that. Boom. So we know that our keyboard shortcuts are here in Mixbus 10.2.keys. So that's a file I should have in my repository. That one's really valuable. And if you accidentally change this and you didn't know, you can go to your Git repository and find out which one you changed. But I'm going to change it back manually, even though I don't think I've ever used this one. Okay, so I've changed that back. Let's go to something different. Let's go to, I don't even know where preferences is. I use keyboard shortcuts. Let's go up to the editor here, and there's an editor general option called region color follows track color. So let's change this and watch the left-hand side there. So we know that these settings are in UI config. So that's nice. Most things that are appearance are within there, I believe. Yep. So most appearance, I think, is in UI config. And so that's in my repository. So there are other things here that you can change, which I haven't yet figured them all out. But again, this is where you might read the manual if you're prone to do crazy things like that. Some of the things that you change here might not update these files immediately. But if you change it and then quit your DAW, quit Mixbus, then they're saved to places like your config file. Okay, so that's the basics of how to do it. But like I said, some things are not immediate, so it takes a bit of poking around. But I will tell you that one benefit of going through this process is, hey, I know my config files a lot better than I used to. So that's kind of cool. All right, so I'm going to quit that command on the left-hand side there. So now I'm going to do something that if you're familiar with Git, you probably know. This is called, in Git it would be Git ls files, but Yatum is a wrapper for it, and it's Yatum ls files. So I've run this command. These are all the config files that are in my repository. So if I just do a search for Mixbus, you can see all my Mixbus stuff here. So these are the files that I was showing you earlier. These are the ones that I've chosen to track. Got the config file. I've got the UI config file. I track all of my export settings. So all of my, say, FLAC 24-bit -14 LUFS. Every time I create a new export file type, or what do you call it? It's not file type. You know what I'm talking about. Export preset, maybe. A new one or edit one, they're all saved here. So I choose to, basically, I bring in this entire export directory, which is this guy here. So all of these are in there. And I just add that whole directory. And so again, so now when I open Mixbus on my laptops, it has the exact same export formats, which is very cool. Okay, mark.profile, that is my Mackie control protocol settings, I believe. So I have a Behringer X-Touch control panel. So that's all the settings for that, which is very nice because I like to customize that. These two presets, this presets directory with Lua scripts in it, this is embarrassing. I remember adding those, but I don't remember what they do. So I should go in there and find that out, but I don't remember. All right, so let's just go back. Let's unsave. Let's see. Okay, so here are my two Ardor files, config and UI config. I just haven't added as many of my Ardor files there yet, but I will probably add a lot of the same files for that. Okay, and again, I have lots of other configs in here that are more like for email, for my calendars, syncing, for my window managers, all sorts of things that are more like day-to-day Linux stuff. But again, they're all synced from computer to computer. So, okay, I've shown how to find which files change. Let's watch. Well, I'll actually do one more thing here, which is Yatum status. So this, again, if you're familiar with Git, that shows everything that I have chosen to add to this repository that's been modified or deleted. So since I last committed and pushed, config for Ardor has changed, config for Mixbus has changed. These changed a lot, and I'll go into some of the things that change in there. I'm actually thinking about maybe taking those out of the repository. They maybe are not necessary. We shall see. There are my keyboard shortcuts. Those have changed at some point. So I wonder what that is. And my UI config. So I would want to review these. And again, if you're using a GUI tool, there's probably a different way to do that, but I am a command line geek. So I'm going to go full screen here with the terminal. What just happened? Wrong. There we go. And I'm going to do Yatum diff. So that's going to open up all of my files that have changed, or been modified in a text editor. So the left side is the most recent version that I committed, and the right side is the current version as it stands on my system. So the right side is the changes that have been made. So this is my Ardor config file. As I said, there are some things in here that change just when you toggle something like your solo, exclusive solo, things like that, I believe. Just looking through all these things. You have to determine which of these things are kind of long-standing settings that you've changed for your workflow and you want to save them. Like solo control is listen control. I believe that setting is something that I would change only if I was going to switch from mixing music in a session versus mixing live. And so I think that is something I would save long term. But other things here are more transitory, and I don't want to save them necessarily. All that just to say this file changes quite often, and I don't, even like window positions down here. And just so you know, there are a lot of lines in here that aren't shown. If you do a, let's see, what is it, ZR, these files are actually pretty long. It just, my diff command hides most of things that have not changed. But as I said, you have like window settings here, which is just not something I want to save. But nestled in here is my history depth, and that is fairly important. And the next one down from that is periodic safety backups. So these are two settings that I'm just beginning to use, and I think I was trying to sync them, make them the same between Ardour and Mixbus. So that's the only reason I changed history depth. So I think that is the number of commands or things that you can do in the DAW that you can undo. It's how long your history is. So you can undo 16 things or 20 things. Obviously, that's fairly important to you if you use the undo command very often. I don't like using undo when mixing because sometimes I don't know what I just undid. And so it's actually kind of scary. Obviously, it is valuable to some people, but it is something probably you want to know how much history is saved, and you want to make it consistent probably. Periodic safety backups, that's pretty important, but I don't know yet how that works. And by that I mean, does that save to your current session file without you ever hitting save? I don't know that I want that, because sometimes I'll change something, then I just want to quit the DAW without saving just because I'm like, oh, I don't know what I changed there. Let me just quit. So I need to learn more about that. But I think these two settings, I think they're important enough to probably commit this file at some point. So all of the other things that are more transitory, it's not a big deal if you do commit them. It's something you can toggle back the opposite direction, not a big deal. But again, there are just a couple things in there that I might want to track. So I'm going to quit this particular file diff and go to the next one. This is the same file, but for Mixbus instead of Ardour. It's my big Mixbus 10 config. It's the exact same file pretty much. So it's a lot of the same issues there, transitory versus something I actually want to track. Next file. So here are a couple things interesting. Oh, that's interesting. So this is my Mixbus keyboard shortcut. So here you can see that secondary, tertiary R, that's that Shift Alt R that I changed to a Shift Alt E. That's the change that I made. You can see it here. So there's something, if it was something that I intended to make that keyboard shortcut, I could commit this. If I didn't intend to make that change, I could actually revert this file. So that's good to see that there. It tells me I've changed that. Down at the bottom here, and I'm going to do a show all. Down at the bottom, I can see that it keeps adding the same block of text over and over. And so I think that's actually a bug in Mixbus. These things should not be here 10 times. I could probably just get rid of them. I don't even know what it does, but again, one of the benefits I think of this whole process is you get to learn your config files. So that's kind of cool. I'm not going to mess with committing any of these right now. However, here's one that's really cool. So this is my Mixbus UI config file. So here is recent session sort. It went from a value of -7 to -1. So this is a very important thing that I want to track and save, and that is when you open up Ardour or Mixbus, it brings up your most recent sessions, and this is the sort order of those sessions. And I determined, because I name my sessions by date, I don't want to see them sorted by modification date or open date, whatever that is. I want them sorted in reverse alphabetical order from the file or the session name. So that was that change that I had made. So now I know that's a session I want to commit and track, so I'm going to add that now. So I'm going to quit out of this, and I'm going to say yadam add, and I'm going to say .config / what is it? Mixbus 10 / oh, wait a minute. Hang on a second. Yadam status. Oh, which one was it? Was it UI config? Now I don't even remember. Doggone it. I'll do yadam diff again. My memory is awful. It was the last one. There it is. It is Mixbus UI config. Okay, now I know. So yadam add .config slash mixbus 10 slash UI underscore config. So that's just that one file with a single change. I'm going to add that like I would in Git, but with Yatum. And then I'm going to say Yatum commit. And I'm going to add a commit message here, which is changed. I'll just say mixbus recent session sort order. I'll know what that means. And then I'm going to do a Yatum push, and that pushes my commit to the remote. So now if I'm on my other laptop, I can just do a Yatum pull, and it'll bring that down. And if there's a conflict, which happens, it'll tell me what the conflict is, which means that maybe I already changed that UI config on the other computer. So that's something you have to contend with, but that's one of the benefits of using this over some sort of file sharing service, because you have granular control over which parts of it that you commit, when you push it to your remote, and when you pull it back down to other computers. So, okay, so one more thing I'll show here. I think I've done pretty well with the demo. I'll do a Yatum log. And again, if you had a GUI tool, you wouldn't have to enter something this long, but this is a way to that I've created a really nice listing of all my commits within this repository. So at the top of the list, you see my most recent, which was to, oh, did I misspell that? Mixubs instead of mixbus. Recent session sort order. So that's the most recent commit I made, and most of the ones below that are all not related to mixbus or order, but all sorts of other things. But if I do a search here for mix, I can't remember if it's case sensitive. So now you can see all sorts of stuff I've saved to mixbus throughout the last year and a half. So that's my audit trail. It's everything that I've changed that had been committed to the repository. So that, again, very valuable. Okay, so back out of full screen. What else should I show? I think that's pretty much it. I'll end by saying what I often say at the end of my videos, which is, I hope this has helped somebody. I hope I've explained the process and shown the tools to such a degree that you could at least understand how you could apply it to your own situation. Or if if you're Linux and a command line guru anyway, maybe I've shown you just a shortcut into getting these into a Git repository. But regardless, I hope it helps.